Hello, members. Welcome and good evening to everybody. My name's Anna Spooner. I'm part of the Tastings and Events team here at the Wine Society, and I am delighted to be joined this evening by the lovely Mahesh behind the scenes. But not only Mahesh, I'm also joined by Freddy Bulmer tonight, who's our buyer for Australia. So Freddy's feet have barely touched the ground the last couple of months with lockdown lifting, etc. So thank you so much, Freddy, for being able to join us tonight.
Pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Oh no, honestly, it's a real treat. So thank you. So a little bit of housekeeping. I know some of you will be watching on YouTube either later this evening or later in the week, or even live now. So apologies, you won't be able to add to the chat. But if you're joining us live on Zoom, then please do add to the chat this evening. I can see a couple of you already using it. That's great. Just make sure that when you do enter your where you are, what you're drinking, your howdies, your hellos, make sure that you put everyone, not just hosts and panelists. Otherwise, it will just be ourselves that can see it and not your fellow members. So please make sure on the drop down you hit everyone. As per usual on our lovely winemaker events, we have got Mahesh behind the scenes managing questions. So again, for those joining us live on Zoom, please enter questions into the Q&A. You'll find that normally on the bottom of your screen on a laptop, top of the screen on your iPad. And that way we can manage the questions a little bit more easily. But I think that's enough from me. Freddie's about to do a glorious introduction to this evening's event.
No pressure.
If we're both sat here in jumpers, Freddie. it's our 8 p.m. It's their morning. We're in jumpers. They're in t-shirts and shirts. It feels a bit weird, but I'm excited, and I'm really excited for hearing all about this exciting new Hunter Valley Semillon from our exhibition range. So I'll hand over to you. A big fat cheers and good evening, everyone.
Cheers and good evening, everyone. Yes, so it's a pleasure that we're joined by Nathan and Stuart from Brokenwood in Hunter Valley this evening, and we will be looking at the brand new exhibition Hunter Valley Semillon, which is an evolution, if you like, of what was the Society's Hunter Valley Semillon, and we have taken it to the next level, quite literally. Stuart and Nathan will talk about the wine style a little bit more. We'll be able to learn a bit about the winery, a bit about the region, and then we're going to taste as well. Do feel free, of course, if you have the bottle at home to I was going to say pull the cork, but crack the screw cap beforehand. You don't need to wait till the tasting at the end, so you can pour yourself a glass as we go along, and then we'll come to the tasting shortly. Just so you know, before I forget, the wine is currently available at an introductory price, which I believe is available until the 7th of February. So it's your opportunity to try it with a couple of pounds off a bottle. And just as a brief bit of background, really, we've worked with Brokenwood at the Wine Society for quite some time now. And we had previously worked together with the Society's Hunter Valley Semillon, as I just mentioned. Now, Semillon, I think, is a really exciting grape variety, and Hunter Semillon in particular is such a unique wine style to this part of Australia. You know, there is nowhere else in the world that makes it in quite the same way. And it can make good quality entry-level wines, but I really believe that it takes on a particularly unique personality with a little bit of bottle age. It kind of turns into this really elegant, complex style of wine, and I was really keen that we reflect this with our own label and actually lean into a style which perhaps does the grape a little bit more justice, rather than trying to drink it too young. You know, it hadn't quite perhaps reached its full potential. And hopefully those of you who do have the bottle will agree that this is a pretty exciting wine. It was actually my first time this evening trying it since it's landed in the UK, and it's looking absolutely delicious. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Nathan and Stuart. Thank you both so much for joining us. I know, as Anna mentioned, it's first thing in the morning for you guys. So we appreciate you being up. It'll be just gone 7 a.m. for you now, but I believe you do both have a bottle of wine to hand. So cheers to you both. And thanks for joining us. Take it away.
Thanks, Freddie. Thanks, everyone, for having us on this morning. It's a new thing to be drinking Semillon from the Hunter Valley at 7 o'clock in the morning, but it's brilliant and looking lovely in the glass. It was great to have you out this year, Freddie, to come and have a look at around around the winery, around our vineyards, and kicking the dirt with us and seeing what we do. And hopefully today we can sort of talk a lot about those, sort of the themes and those messages that we spoke about when we had you over, looking at all things Brokenwood and what we do.
Absolutely.
For everyone out there, my name's Nathan. I'm the National Sales and Export Manager, managing the relationship with the Wine Society that we've had for a number of years now, and we're very excited to be now at the exhibition label and releasing this wine. I think we've got an amazing program of wine from back vintages that's showing some ages Freddie discussed, and Stu will go in more detail over the coming years. So a really exciting program that we're putting together where we can show the very unique style of Australian wine that is Hunter Valley Semillon. But Brokenwood, who are we? What do we do? For those of you who don't know too much about us, starting in 1970, hobby farmers. Probably one of our most famous founder was James Halliday, coming up here to the Hunter Valley a couple of hours north of Sydney. We'll speak to a little bit more detail in time, with two of his solicitor friends, Tony Albert and John Beested, to start a small little tractor shed with a little bit of vineyard holding. As you can see there on the top of the slide, where we started, well, it's on the right-hand side there, some small vineyards. So what was first planted as the cricket pitch in front of the tractor shed there, and evolving into what we are today, which is a huge cellar door with a restaurant, a cafe, and a full-on hospitality. Yeah, so quite the contrast and change. As you can see, the winery, as Stu will attest, out the back hasn't changed a lot. It's an add-on process. Everything we do in there is quite small batch, but it's quite amazing to see kind of where we've come from. Brokenwood Wines from 1970 to opening up this building in 2018. I'm sure some of you have been out already to visit the place, and looking forward to having more of you moving forward. I won't talk too much. I'm happy to bounce some things around with Stu and Freddie, but I'd love to introduce Stuart Horden, our senior winemaker, to talk a little bit about, Stu, what is it now, about the 13th vintage, 14th vintage, 13th?
Yeah, 14th. And
14th.
Occurred to me
Time
the other
flies.
day, which time flies.
So yeah,
You must have been about 12 years old, Stuart, when you started. Surely.
Thank you, Freddie. Yeah,
Welcome.
baby-faced killer. Well, good evening, everyone. Thank you for the introduction. Thank you for inviting us to join you for a respectable 8 p.m. tasting. It is 7 a.m. here, but I must say, if I'm going to have one fine wine for breakfast, Hunter Valley Semillon is certainly where I want to start. Look, it's great to join you. Judging by the little chat windows, it sounds like it's pretty chilly in the UK currently. I don't mean to rub anyone's face in it, but we're going to get to 29 degrees today, and it's blue sky. Things are looking wonderful here in the Hunter Valley. We're probably about 10 days away from starting harvest. We've had a very wet winter, early spring, but the weather has been kind over the last couple of months. So we're sort of we're not too far away from kicking off, which is exciting. It's always there's always lovely energy this time of year in the valley. There's always an influx of vintage staff arriving, a couple of internationals, which is wonderful to have back on deck after a couple of years of that not being an option. So we're full as agriculturalists tend to be. We are full of optimism for the season ahead of us, but that's, I guess, tempered until we have it in. We will start picking Chardonnay and Semillon, I think, end of next week, and that sort of first week, last week January, first week of February into mid-Feb will be the busiest time of year for us, undoubtedly. So it's quite a nice time of year here. We're sort of counting down a little bit, but enjoying the last couple of weekends that we have up our sleeves. So it's quite pleasant. Look, Semillon in the Hunter Valley, it's the flagship white wine of the region and one of the iconic white wines of not just Australia, but the world. There's nothing else like it. As we all know, you can't be sort of unique. We are unique. It's obviously a French variety. It's been grown here in the Hunter Valley for almost 200 years. And over that time, that the style's really been, I guess, honed and defined, and it's a style that speaks of real clarity of not just the variety, but the region in which it's grown. For those of you that don't know, the Hunter Valley, as Nathan mentioned, is just north of Sydney, about an hour and a half, almost due north of Sydney, about 50 kilometres as the crow flies from the Pacific coast. So we're quite we're probably Australia's most northern fine wine region. But there's a very specific set of circumstances that allow this region to thrive, particularly with Semillon. So this combination of a warm subtropical climate, proximity to the coast, and some natural geological features in the valley allow us to produce a white wine that in its youth is incredibly crisp, fresh, has wonderful lime juice, lemongrass flavors. On a blue sky day with some prawns and some oysters is one of the great food and wine pairings around. But what sets it apart is its ability to age. And I take my hat off to Freddie and the team for wanting to show a Semillon with a couple of years of bottle age and showing the wine's capacity, because to not just age but evolve. I think when we look at wines that we talk about aging wines, the reality is that not every wine is really built for cellaring, but Hunter Valley Semillon, especially in the world of whites, is one of the great aging white wines. These, I guess, relatively simple, crisp citrus aromatics and flavors that start out in youth develop into these much more complex, rounded, full flavors of brioche, of lemon curd, of beeswax, all of these wonderful sort of hot buttered toast, these wonderful sort of complex characters that come only with time. This is a wine that is naturally picked at 11% alcohol on average. So a low alcohol wine without chasing the fad of being a low alcohol wine. We're not sacrificing flavor. We're not sacrificing style or pedigree of the wine. It's just naturally where we achieve flavor ripeness. So
Stuart, if I may ask, what is it about the Hunter Semillon that you think actually sets it up so well to age? I mean, we talk about acidity a lot when it comes to ageability, but as you quite rightly just mentioned, that it evolves, it doesn't just age. What is it about the variety that kind of allows it to do that, do you think?
I think that combination of flavor ripeness with acidity. So most other regions, Semillon tends to it's a naturally relatively high acid grape. In a cooler climate, it does not fade away, and it tends to be quite herbaceous. So it's sort of a bit of a poor cousin to Sauvignon Blanc in that regard. It sort of doesn't quite have the aromatic abundance or purity of Sauvignon Blanc in cooler climates, and relatively bracing acidity. Because of where we're located, where we have that warm climate, tempered by that coastal influence, the grapes actually achieve ripeness at that 10.5%, 11.5% alcohol. So with acid in check. And that's really what the key is with all white wine, or with all wine, that balance of flavor and acid or fruit sweetness is really what we're chasing. If you sort of think about the perfectly ripe piece of fruit, it has sweetness, it has a lot of flavor, but it has a bit of it has crispness, and it has a bit of tension that sort of makes you salivate and want more. If you let that fruit get just sweeter and sweeter, it becomes cloying, and it doesn't have that tension and energy in the fruit. Or also the other side, if you pick too ripe, it's just sour and it's unripe, and there's no flavor around it. And that balance of those two, I guess, competing factors is what sets great wine apart more broadly, but certainly Hunter Valley Semillon is in a very narrow window where that works. And that balance of fruit and acid sort of holds true. The wine is not matured in oak. It all comes with bottle age, and that's really how it really is an exercise in being patient.
Sorry, Freddie.
No, I was just going to very quickly ask, sorry, just for people watching, they may know or may not know, but probably the other famous region globally for Semillon, or a region where it's plays a significant part, be Bordeaux in white Bordeaux blends. But why is it then, do you think, that it's such a unique variety when it's bottled as a single grape variety in Hunter Valley versus used as a blend? I mean, do you see Semillon blends so often in Hunter Valley?
Oh, no, there are some out, like Semillon and Sauvignon Blanc do go well together. That sort of aromatic lift that you get from Sauvignon Blanc is pretty appealing, coupled with the tension and length that the Semillon gives. I guess Sauvignon Blanc on its own is probably is a bit more upfront, probably doesn't have the length and complexity, whereas Semillon probably doesn't have the aromatic lift. So they do work well together, sort of in a more commercial set. I think
we've lost Stuart.
We might have lost him.
Has he frozen for you, Nathan?
Yeah, he has frozen, Freddie.
Okay, we'll give him a minute. You were going to jump in with something, but I guess if you were going to ask Stuart a question, probably now. Not such a good time.
But to follow on where Stu's talking about, I guess the uniqueness of Semillon from the Hunter Valley is when it's as its own variety in the bottle. We'll talk further, when Stu jumps back on. But what he's talking about is the style of wine when it's new to bottle in the year. The year that it's harvested is the year that it goes to bottle, the year that it's released for us out in Australia, and how we enjoy it in our summer with raw seafood. And that tends to be, really the start of, where good Hunter Semillon is, has a benchmark. But it's all the change. And what we're going to talk about today is all its ability to age in the bottle and those secondary characteristics to start to develop more. And that's a really unique thing.
One thing that is quite interesting, given the fact that Hunter Semillon is such a fresh, focused, bright acidity styled wine, is that actually Hunter Valley gets pretty hot in the middle of summer, doesn't it? Is it right that it's actually, in terms of the peaks, it's actually one of the hottest regions in Australia for wine production?
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess when you think about Australia, everywhere's hot.
Sure.
The way I like to, the thing I like to explain to people is, I guess it's when the growing season's set up.
Yeah.
We look at, use Melbourne Cup Day, so the second Tuesday in November. For us here in the Hunter Valley, really warm. That's when things start to kick off. So you're in spring, but we're already starting to hit, the mid-20s. We're still getting coolish evenings, but the vines really start to take off. You can just see them start jumping out of the ground. Versus, say, South Australia, the Barossa or McLaren Vale, they're still really having quite cool spring days, and they don't really hit their straps to having really warm, that sort of 40-degree plus, that you hear about in the news when they're in a heat wave. That really doesn't start to sort of now. I think the bike race, the Tour Down Under was on, I think, last weekend, or they're getting ready for it. And they're really starting to talk about, these oppressive conditions of sort of 40 plus degrees. And that's really when it kicks off for them and when it starts to get warm. But we really see these sort of more moderate, like in the high 20s, in the 30s, but consistently for a longer period of time, or starting earlier. That's why we're picking in 2-3 weeks' time. So the vines are just so much further ahead, because of that sort of that early start.
And now also one thing that maybe a lot of people don't realize, because we talk so much about, in the UK, about regions like Barossa and McLaren Vale, they're perhaps more widely known in the UK wine market. Actually, Hunter is one of the oldest wine regions in Australia, as I understand it.
And Stu loves this topic, so he's jumping back on at the perfect time.
He couldn't wait.
Sorry,
that's all right.
I was just asking
Stu. I was just asking about how Hunter is actually one of the oldest wine regions in Australia. Can you give us a bit of background on the history?
Absolutely. So we're the Hunter Valley. Apologies, everyone. Not quite sure what happened there. But apologies if I repeat something Nathan said while I've been off. Look, the Hunter Valley we're about to celebrate our 200th birthday in in 2028, which sounds like a long way away, but is only 5 years away. So we're actually Australia's longest continually producing wine region. A large part of that comes down to the proximity to Sydney. The first grapes came up to the valley as, I guess, just followed exploration in the early 19th century. So we've grown grapes here for quite some time. The original grapes that came to Australia predominantly arrived out of a combination of the Cape in South Africa and from a gentleman by the name of James Busby's collection that brought a lot of cuttings to Australia in the early 1800s. So I think one of the things that comes with that longevity of production for a region like the Hunter Valley, regions like the Barossa Valley, another really old established region in Australia, is we have a really firm idea of both the varieties of the work in the region, but also the styles of wine that the region produces. And I think that's a big thing for us, is not trying to be everything to everyone, and also not trying to force a style on a wine. I think that's really one of the things that Hunter Valley Semillon has in its favour, is that there is nothing else quite like it on the planet. I think when I travel or you taste widely, you see that every wine region in the world has a Chardonnay, and they have a version of it, and that's a great thing. Chardonnay is an incredibly versatile, remarkable grape variety. But I think in terms of varieties that speak of region, having something that no one else has and be of exceptional high quality is a rare thing. I think when I think of Australian wines that are the Australian Shiraz is certainly something that's not replicated elsewhere on the planet, but there's still, last I looked, Rhone Valley's doing okay things. But Hunter Valley Semillon, the fortifieds from the Rutherglen region are two things that really no one else on the earth has. And these are remarkable wines, not just in terms of initial quality, but their capacity to age and their capacity to evolve over a long period of time.
Nathan, did you have anything you wanted to add on there?
Yeah, the question I was just going to throw Stu's way before we dropped out just before is, Stu, like you said, it's just about go time for us and picking. When you were describing a lot of the flavors of what a young Semillon looks like, what's the vineyard look like for you? What are the berries? How, like, you're in there a bit now. Like,
sure.
Daily thing, what's optimum when, because we're 1%ers. When do we really hit that go window, and what are you tasting?
Yeah, sure. So look, I guess what I'm looking for in the fruit at the moment is, I guess Semillon. The best Semillon vineyards basically in the Hunter Valley are on old creek flats. They're on sort of lighter soil, finer soil, relatively fertile. We sort of want Semillon to carry a little bit of crop without it being severely low yielding. We want a bit of, I think that combination of fruit weight and helps retain acidity. We don't want them to ripen. Our best vineyards don't ripen quickly. This vineyard that the Society wine comes from is a vineyard called Trevina Vineyard, which is about 3 kilometres away from where we sit today, and is an old vineyard. It's planted in 1920. It's on its own roots. It's on which is a rare thing for Semillon. We have a lot of old vine Shiraz, but there's not an abundance of old vine Semillon. Yield does tend to tail away with older vines with whites, and that's not always ideal, but this vineyard's held together for a very long period of time. It's one of my favourite Semillon vineyards that we take from each year. It's, I guess, what we're looking for in terms of how the bunches appear. We want Semillon's a high juicing variety, so the bunches are large-ish. Berry size is probably about the size of your thumbnail, and we want shaded fruit without it being. We don't want it overly exposed to the sun. If you sort of think of grape skins a bit like your own skin, you don't want it sunburnt. also you don't want no exposure to the sun. You don't want sort of limey, pasty skin, but also we don't want the skin like an old bag of leather.
As an Englishman, and I'm sure I can speak for a lot of members here, we take that personally, Stu. Hey.
But you don't, it's good. It's important not to be overexposed. The other side of it is just as terrifying, to be perfectly honest. The skins toughen up, the juice yield drops down. There's a really fine, some exposure without total exposure is the aim of the game. A healthy green canopy, and when I'm out in the vineyard, we do test the chemistry of the juice and the sample, absolutely. But it's, as much as anything, it's on taste. I've grown up here in the Hunter Valley after tasting fruit for the best part of 20 years. You sort of have a pretty firm idea of where things are at before the numbers. What I'm really looking for in the juice, though, is that sort of almost Schweppes lemonade flavour coming through in the fruit. It's not quite as effervescent, but they're really like quite fresh, quite crisp, but a very pure sort of lemonade flavour is really what I'm looking for in the fruit. And when we start getting towards that window, it's close to time to pick. So one of the things with Semillon, they are large berries. They do juice a lot. So all of our best Semillon is hand picked, not machine. Some of our Semillon is machine picked, but that's more for the sem that goes into our Semillon Sauvignon Blanc blend. The best Semillon is hand picked in the cool of the morning. We start at dawn. As soon as we can see, we start harvesting, and we go until about midday lunchtime. It gets a bit hot. The fruit gets a bit hot. The pickers get a bit hot, and they run out of steam. So we tend to call stumps at about midday lunchtime and go again the next day. And that gives us the afternoon to process the fruit. In terms of winemaking, it's really an exercise in detail, and it's a short window. So the winemaking itself with Semillon it's really a 10 to 14 day process. The majority of it is complete within that window. We harvest, the fruit is pressed day of harvest and chilled down. It's allowed to settle for a couple of days. If you sort of think about when the juice comes out of the grape presses, it sort of resembles sort of cloudy apple juice, for want of a better term. It sort of has a nice bright green hue, but there's a lot of solids in it. So we keep that cold for a couple of days. Those solids settle to the bottom of the tank. Sort of if you leave your pulpy apple juice in the fridge for a couple of days, that the pulp settles to the bottom. And the longer you leave it, the more compact that becomes. And after 2 to 3 days, we pump that clear juice off. That we really want for Semillon. We want that clear, pure juice. Whereas with a variety like Chardonnay, I'll use all of those solids. But Semillon, I want that clarity and that purity. And then we, depending on the wine, we'll add yeast to the majority, a specific strain, again, to retain that purity of style. We do muck around with a few wild yeasts in Semillon. Our Chardonnay is almost entirely wild yeast. Some of our Shiraz sort of play a little bit, but for me, the best version, or our best version of Semillon, is with a cultured yeast that really respects and captures that purity of the wine. Ferment goes through in about 10 days. And once fermentation's through, so fermentation is a process of converting that sugar into alcohol, which until that's done, all we're drinking is grape juice, which I can tell you gets becomes a bit much once you've been tasting juice every day for a week. We're all pretty glad once we've fermented out. Once fermentation's through, we leave it in tank for about 2 months, and then a basic filtration and off to bottle. And the magic really occurs in bottle over that. Where are we? 2018. So this is be pretty close to bang on 5 years to the day, this wine, from when it was harvested.
Thanks, Stu. Now there's a few questions coming in here and there. We'll get to most of them at the end, but just while you're on the topic of talking about how the wine was made, there's just a quick question that I'm going to pick out, which was about challenges in the in the vineyards. Is there much sort of disease pressure, mildew, etc.? Is the question.
Absolutely. The Hunter Valley is not for the faint of heart. But I think the reality for me is that the most exciting wine regions on the planet have an element of marginal about it. I think with safety and with consistency, we do. I think you can miss out on the high notes. You do miss out on the misses, which is a challenge. But I think one of the reasons this season particularly has been relatively challenging. We had a very wet winter, as I mentioned earlier, and wet mid-spring, to be perfectly honest. We'd hit our annual rainfall by the end of June last year, which is that tends to be a number that I certainly has stuck with me. But so last year was one of the wettest years we actually have on record, but it really comes down to when the rain occurs. There was certainly a fair amount of downy pressure early on in the season, like downy mildew, which is a mold that attacks the leaf and the fruit. But we've been very fortunate with the weather since about mid-October, when I don't mean this personally, Freddie, but it's about since you left.
Oh, good. Yeah. Do you know, when I was out with you guys on that trip in October, the amount of people in rainy Australia that said, "Oh, so you brought the weather with you?"
Yeah.
By the end of that trip, I felt terrible. I thought, God, maybe I did. I'm so sorry.
No, it's okay. We've had a couple of wet years in a row, but the weather's been pretty kind to us since. So disease pressure is always a thing. The weather around the rainfall is really what matters. So if we have an inch of rain on any given day of the week, we can live with that. If the weather's kind around it, if that inch is spread over a week, things get a little bit tougher to manage. But all in all, considering where we were in sort of August, September, I'm really excited about where things are looking for vintage 2023, which I still haven't quite adjusted to saying yet, to be honest.
It's tough to get your head around, isn't it? Now, we're going to shortly move on to tasting the new wine together, but just beforehand, so as you've touched on quite rightly, the ageability of Hunter Semillon is really something that kind of sets it apart. And also, I think the value at the ageability as well is pretty amazing. But with that extent of that ageability in a wine, like we're tasting today, or in maybe your very top examples of Hunter Semillon, and when you personally quite like to, again, crack the screw cap.
Yeah, for sure.
Drink it yourself.
Okay. Well, look, I guess there's two. To me, the ageability of great Semillon is relatively unparalleled, to be honest. It's as long as one has the patience and the capacity to hang on to it. But the reality is we're not making time capsules. We would like these wines to be enjoyed and drank at some point within our lifetimes. For me, there's really two windows with Hunter Valley Semillon. I think, as with most wines, that are aged, they do tend to go through a bit of a dumber, sort of awkward teenage phase a little bit, and that length of time and when that occurs varies on the wine. I think for me with Semillon, that sort of that lovely, crisp, young, refreshing style on release, I really enjoy. I think they go through that first sort of 12 to 24 months. That sort of purity and crispness is really exciting. But as soon as you're on to the next vintage, something comes out that's a bit more crisper, a bit more fresher. So then you need to wait, give it a little bit of time. So I think that depending on the wine, 2.5 to 4 year period, they tend to shut down a little bit. They don't quite have they've lost their purity and a bit of their freshness, but they haven't yet developed any of that sort of those complex sort of toast characters coming through. So look, for me, the perfect window to me is in that 5 to 10 year window. I think when you start seeing the benefit of a bit of age, some complexity starting to show through, and that nice sort of lemon curd character starting to really pop. and then after that, it's patience. I guess we're coming into a bit of a golden age with Hunter Valley Semillon now. We've now been 2023 represents the 20th year since we've moved entirely to screw cap at Brokenwood, and so the wine's capacity to age or hasn't really changed under screw cap, but its consistency has really come a long way. I think that's the most exciting thing for me. One of the main reasons we jumped to screw cap was because of our aging program for our Hunter Valley Semillon. We were having to throw out about a third of our production, a third of our museum stock under cork, and there's just no room to hide with an aromatic white wine with random ox and cork as the Burgundians are finding out.
That's very true. Actually, on that, this is a very geeky question, but given that it's a wine which has such great potential for aging under screw cap, do you spend much time thinking about what type of screw cap you're going to use for these wines? Because of course, different screw caps have different little discs inside which let different levels of oxygen through. Is that a real consideration?
We haven't. We've gone. We don't trial March. We did early on, but certainly we want the minimum oxygen ingress we can find. Like that sort of. I don't. Our trials with caps that allow certain rates of air ingress have been abject failures for us. They are designed for wines that are on sale and consumed quickly in their life. Their ageability is severely compromised.
That's really interesting. And actually, just thinking about it, there's sometimes an argument against screw cap for ageable wines because people say, oh, but it slows the aging down so much, or things don't really age under screw cap and so on. Yep. But actually, what Hunter Valley Semillon like this shows is that's nonsense. That maybe says something more about the wine, or the fact that corks can be so sort of hit and miss, inconsistent, because actually even in the, as you say, almost 5 years to the day since this wine was harvested, it's been under screw cap, and it has changed quite considerably since it was first bottled. So it goes to show that it's actually not so much about the screw cap when it comes to slowing down aging, because this clearly has aged.
Absolutely, and I think that's a really important point. And I think we did this tasting when you were here, Freddie, of looking at a vertical of Hunter Valley Semillon under cap. And if we look at the wine that we're trying today, the Trevina, it has this wonderful, like, it still looks really youthful. Don't get me wrong; it's a 5-year Semillon, but if I put the 2022 next to that, it looks relatively advanced. Also, maybe not advanced, but certainly developed. When Semillon, particularly these aging styles that start out, they are relatively colour-wise, they're light. There's not a depth of colour. This has a wonderful sort of straw, like light straw coming in, but sort of still with green hues coming through it. And these colours have evolved under time. The best. It's a difficult thing to do visually over a Zoom call.
I don't know if this is really helping, is it?
No, but doing a vertical of very young Semillon or current vintage back over 5 years, the evidence is there to see relatively. Well, it's not even relatively easily. It's just easily.
It's easily, yeah. Now that actually brings us on really nicely to tasting the wine. We ought to spend 5 minutes talking about it, really. As I mentioned at the beginning of the call, this is the first time I've tasted it since it landed in the UK. Obviously, I tasted a sample or two before we shipped it in the first place. But I was super happy with this when I opened it. It's come into that second phase really nicely. I mean, as you talked about, Stuart, this style of wine can kind of close down a little bit until it gets to 4 or 5 years old, and it kind of re-emerges from its cocoon as a beautiful butterfly. And I think this has really entered into that stage perfectly. And the idea with this project is to consistently, year after year, provide this exhibition, Hunter Semillon, in that second phase. You touched a little bit on the sort of characteristics that you might expect, Stu, in Hunter Semillon's second phase, but But yeah, give us your thoughts on how this is smelling and how this is tasting. And obviously, Nathan, if you've got any thoughts as well, then do jump in.
Look, I think this is a look. 2018 is a celebrated year in the Hunter Valley for both red and white. A really exciting year, and I think we really, one of the important things at Brokenwood, and it's a fair, it's a really important thing to us, and it's a big investment to do it. But nonetheless, it's critical, is that we put a lot of resources into cellaring these wines before release, so they are ready to drink when we release them. Because I guess, as I've alluded to, young Sem's a wonderful sort of aperitif, young crisp white wine. It's a great drink, but telling someone without evidence that this is a wine that will age for as long as one has the patience to, it can be a bit of a bridge too far. So it's really critical to us that we have these wines available for sale, with showing some of the development and maturity that comes. I think we've touched on the colour. I think it's still wonderfully youthful. Despite that bit of development, there's that wonderful, I think I see that sort of key lime pie, lime curd coming through, that sort of nice baked pastry, butter, all of these sort of almost roasted nuts, but there's always this sort of citrus lick through it.
That's so true. There's a little tiny hint on the back for me of nutmeg on the nose, just a delicate little note. And somebody mentioned lime as well in the chat there. Just to say for anyone at home, if you are picking up on particular aromas or flavors, do mention them in the chat. But I think the thing that's quite striking, Stuart, is just I'm really impressed with the complexity of it, and it is really a nice combination of that bright primary citrus fruit, but then all these lovely savoury characteristics that are coming into it too. Yeah,
these more sort of almost like these. They're almost a sort of like a patisserie or sort of a bakery characteristics that come through. And then the key to me on this wine is the palate. That combination of weight. The acid's there and it gives it freshness, but by no means is it a hard, bony wine. It has volume and power without it being. Semillon needs acidity for longevity, but it needs fruit to evolve. Yeah, that makes sense. I see Anna's popped up. That must mean something's gone terribly wrong.
No, not at all. I'm really enjoying it, so I wanted to chime in.
Please do. So, what are your thoughts, Anna?
It's absolutely amazing. I love Hunter Valley Semillon, and I'd be the first to confess that it was a wine that I came to much later in my wine journey. I'd always drunk the young, sprightly, very vivacious. You used the word tension earlier, Stuart, which I've always had these tense, lovely wines, but I never understood why everybody used to rave about them. And then I had one blind in a diploma blind tasting, and the reason I'm mentioning this is you have to talk about how it's made, and there are two questions that members have asked that I'd like you to just cover, Stuart, because Hunter Valley Semillon tricked me. When I first started tasting the really old versions, it tricked me. We've had one member ask, do you ever mature in oak? And another member ask about malolactic fermentation. Because that weight, those notes of sort of bread, brioche, etc., you get taught along the way in your wine journey that those come from oak, or they come from, the yogurty thing from mallow. Key lime pie, you immediately think oak and mallow. So what's happening? How do they get there?
So in answer to the question, no to both. So 100% stainless steel and no malolactic fermentation. So it is the curio of Hunter Valley Sem and why we get excited about it, because it does all of these things without all of the things you just mentioned, Anna. I think, to me, that combination of, as I've alluded to, that combination of flavour ripeness with acidity and natural acidity is really the key to it. And capturing that purity and giving it the capacity to age. It is a bit of a juggle. Having the patience and having the resource to hang on to a wine for this long, but it's really important that we're able to show it with time. I take your point on every wine school or blind wine school loves Hunter Valley Semillon. It's hurdle everyone likes to throw in there as the little curveball to talk about. I don't know what percentage of our sales is based on that program, but the Wesset program, but I think we do okay. So anyone out there studying Wesset, it's coming at you.
And it'll trick you. Thank you.
There is something I know. Obviously, it's completely unique in comparison to any Chardonnay. But for me, there's a lot of boxes that a wine like this ticks, which actually white Burgundy was able to tick a few years ago when it used to be perhaps slightly lower in alcohol, slightly fresher in style before the region started to warm up a bit. So I guess, I mean, you two are going to be slightly biased, but I guess this could be a nice option for people to buy a case of and put away, if they were people who might once have been buying white Burgundy.
I certainly value.
Value-wise, no doubt about it.
Maybe the access and price is a bit better in the UK, but I tell you what, white Burgundy is pretty offensive over here at the moment.
Yeah, very much so.
Look, I agree. I think it's a great, but that complexity and weight that comes, and without it being overworked, and its capacity to hang in there is a great thing. Someone was asking about different individual vineyards in the Hunter and where they show different styles. It's certainly a big thing for us. As I mentioned, the Trevina vineyard is on very fine, silty creek beds. And that is where the best Semillon comes from. They're the areas that have this sort of very pure citrus flavour profile. When we take Semillon to richer soils, things on heavier clay, heavier, more fertile soils, you tend to get more of a herbaceous, grassy character coming through to the Semillon, which makes a more sort of a friendlier wine in youth, but probably doesn't have the capacity to age quite as well. These finer soils certainly produce the most other vineyards with the most pedigree and have the best longevity.
Yeah, that makes sense. Nathan, was there anything that you kind of wanted to add? Your thoughts on the wine. Also, I'd be quite interested to hear a little bit about drinking occasions for a wine like this. I think it's something which perhaps in the UK, people who may be new to Hunter Semillon aren't entirely sure on. When do you open this? Is it with food, without food? Is it 8 a.m. in the morning or 7 a.m. in the morning, whatever it is for you? Is that the perfect time?
Yeah. 7:48 in the morning is the perfect time for drinking. I guess my thoughts on the wine, and I'm biased, but I'm also lucky that I've been trying these wines with Stu for about 12 years with Brokenwood. But I think one thing Stu's really brought into these wines in his tenure as a winemaker is this middle palate texture.
Yeah.
There's this really lovely, so we talk a lot about the acid, we talk a lot about the citrus, but what Stu has brought into these wines is this lovely grip and almost like a tannin, but just the flow and texture that really gives the single vineyard Hunter Sems we produce when they've got some age like this, that added complexity. And I think that's what stands them out. We've been lucky, or we've had some good wines over the last 3 years, winning best 1-year-old Semillon at the Hunter Valley Wine Show. And again, looking at those wines each year on reflection, it's that middle palate texture that really stands it, above its peers. And it's exciting that we've got those wines coming out in the next few years. So that's kind of always my big takeaway when I look at these wines and go, that's what I really dig. Now with food, I guess when we talk about that younger Semillon and the occasion, we're probably more in that raw seafood area. We release these wines in around August, and it's getting into spring and into the festive season. We're eating a lot of oysters and sashimi and things like that, and it goes perfectly. We probably start to look when we get here, still at seafood, maybe cooked, maybe getting towards something that we can have a little bit of oiliness, but then drive a little bit of acid as well and kind of give it both. So, that tends to be, I guess, kind of the culinary journey and how we like to, see them served in our restaurants for sure.
What's really nice, just to add to that, that I'm finding with this wine, and sometimes I think in particular with the examples that have a little bit of maturity like this, it's actually they're really nice on their own, especially, during the summertime. It's an incredibly refreshing style of wine, and nice that on one hand it is very refreshing, very drinkable, but on the other hand, actually, as we've touched on, it's a very complex style, which means it's got quite a lot to offer. I'm conscious that there's a few questions coming in. Anna, did you want to sort of field a few of those?
Yeah, lovely. Thank you so much, actually, all three of you. It's been totally fascinating. And I have to say, I can't believe we've not talked about Hunter Valley Semillon more, Freddie, on our online. I mean, we've picked the perfect launch event for it with the masters of it, but it's just making me think I've missed a lot of opportunities. It never comes to the forefront when I'm thinking of things like sushi and sashimi, and I've missed a lot of opportunities in the last year. So
lots of making up to do.
Lots of making up to do.
Yeah.
I saw a member earlier said they'd had seafood linguine earlier, which sounded like it would be a
Perfect.
darn good.
Absolutely.
Yeah, pretty perfect combination. So hopefully, Ian Walters, that answers your question that you've just asked. And yeah, very good. And Nathan just started touching on something about the sort of house style of Brokenwood, which James has also asked in the chat. Does Brokenwood style differ? And if so, how to others in the valley? And then is this Semillon typical of other valley winery equivalents?
Yeah. Look, I think it is. It's pretty typical of the Hunter Valley, but I think the thing that Brokenwood, Semillon, and Nathan touched on this, is that mid palate, and I think that's a combination of, to me, vineyard resource, although a lot of other wineries in the valley do have excellent Semillon vineyards, but vineyard resource. I do like to press our Semillon a little bit further than a few other people. I do like to. I guess as I mentioned earlier, we're fermenting pretty clean, bright juice, and so getting a little bit of phenolic and a little bit of those, not hard pressings, but maybe just towards hard pressings at the end there, goes a long way, I think, to building that palate and giving that weight you see in this wine with time. Because I think we spent a lot of time talking about how these wines age. The fruit and the fruit profile and the weight of the palate is what evolves with time. The acidity stays relatively true for the life of the wine. It holds it up, but the development and flavour is really that fruit that you have quite early on. And if you have a young, narrow, skinny wine, it will become an old, narrow, skinny wine. There's nothing sure. You need that fruit flavour, that volume there in youth, and that's what evolves with time. And we talk a lot about this here at the winery, but is having enjoyment in youth and giving it but also having capacity to age. And if that fruit flavour is not there initially, it will not build with time. Fabulous.
Thank you very much. We've also got another question, which I know that we sadly don't sell it. I imagine quantities are pretty small, but one member has asked, do you make a dessert Semillon or a sweet Semillon?
We do. It's small amounts and it's very sporadic. One of the joys of being in the Hunter Valley and a subtropical climate is we tend to, I guess for those that don't know, sticky or dessert style wines are generally made using botrytis, which is a mold that grows on the grapes, but it's a beneficial mold. It's called noble rot, and it concentrates the sugar of the fruit. You need very specific climatic conditions to grow that type of botrytis, or botrytis cinerea, or noble rot. It has a very close cousin by the name of grey rot, and we tend to, if the weather's not on our side, we tend to get more of the cousin you don't want as opposed to the noble type. So we do make it when the season allows, but it's a tough one to dial in every year. It's a very small make, and we tend not to be. I don't think we export very much of that. So it's a very small make.
Fabulous. So members, if you are interested in trying it, you'll have to go and visit.
Perfect.
Just to say, it is well worth the visit. If anybody is even, Sydney is a couple of hours drive away, but it's worth it because the cellar door is absolutely phenomenal. I was blown away when I was out there late last year. Definitely make time for lunch and a tasting. It's a great setup.
Yeah, I think I flashed a photo earlier, but when I was browsing around the website, I was absolutely stunned by your setup. You've got restaurants and the works, and it looks absolutely amazing. So very jealous, Freddie, that you got to go. So we've got a couple of other questions. One is about how you mentioned your picking earlier, and I sort of wanted to mention the sweet wine first. When you're picking your normal semillons, do you find that you have to go through multiple times, or is it quite easy does it all ripen evenly, should we say?
It ripens relatively evenly. We don't, unlike sort of, I guess that Sauterne style of picking, we're not doing multiple passes at harvest. We are doing multiple passes through the season to remove green fruit, but that's more a viticulture thing than a harvest thing. Semillon tends to be a one pass, but it's relatively slow picking because there's a lot of sorting done in the vineyard. I guess over the Semillon, as I mentioned earlier, is a large berried fruit. It juices very quickly, so the ability to put that fruit through, hand pick it, and then over, say, a sorting table is compromised. It does more damage than good. So we spend a lot more time, effort, and both of those things actually just add up to money, to have a relatively dedicated picking crew that go through with an eagle eye. We have people in the bins just making sure nothing but the better bunches get through.
Perfect.
Particularly on these single vineyard wines that are destined to age. Like we know where the best fruit comes from, and where that focus needs to be.
Wonderful, thank you. You lead me on actually to a great question, which is around Freddie's. Well, it's a combo question, really. Freddie's put on our website, "We'll drink now till 2028." And if, as Freddie suggested earlier, members buy some bottles of this and lay it down and drink one a year, what should they expect by the time we get to 2028? Where do you imagine the evolution of this wine going?
It will be gradual. It won't be rapid. It will just. I think one of the great things about aging Hunter Valley Semillon is that it's a bit like compound interest. A little bit. It just sort of builds on itself each year. You're not going to come back and look at it next week and think, my Lord, it's jumped, it's grown a foot in a week. But just those flavours that you're seeing now will build. So if it's key lime pie that we're seeing, it will become a richer, more flavoursome key lime pie over that time. Those flavours, they stay on a relatively true track, but the depth and nuance of those flavours really builds over that time period that Freddie's alluded to, which is spot on. And if these wines don't have an expiration date, that's I really think the important thing. But I think that but that sweet spot for me with aging these wines, where there's still some energy in the wine, is that sort of 5 to 10 years old.
Perfect. And I suppose I should caveat to members, the Wine Society's drink date promises are not, you must drink it all before this date. But Freddie can say more than I can, but it's giving you some guidance.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Exactly. Yeah, I think for me with this, it was really very much about sort of trying to highlight that sweet spot. And I'm confident that it is a wine that will definitely last beyond that. But for me personally, anyway, I think the ideal kind of window to really get the best out of it, probably the best out of it for the most amount of people, I should say, because there will be certain people who will love it incredibly mature, but that probably won't be everybody's sort of cup of tea. Okay. So yeah, for me, there's a really fantastic window up to about that 10-year sort of mark. So it's also, I think, quite nice that it's a wine which you can buy now with a little bit of maturity, but also keep, you can buy it, stick it away for 5 years plus, and happy days.
I think the great thing about a wine like this is the majority of the hard work's done, and I think the idea of releasing these wines at the age we are is, I think it's really in the window for enjoyment, as Freddie said. There are no awards given for the longest bottle of wine kept.
Like that.
Very good point. Very good point. Yeah,
I think that's probably the perfect way to end. That's one of, yeah, I'm going to have to use that, Stuart. But I must say a huge thank you. Firstly, thanks to Mahesh behind the scenes, as always, for helping things go smoothly. Thank you to Freddie for joining us. I know you're tired. You got back late last night, and I really do appreciate you joining.
Just to clarify, that's from a buying trip. I wasn't just out getting drunk. It sounded like I was just at the pub or something.
Yeah, when I said his feet haven't touched the ground, I do mean work.
Yeah.
I'm sure there's been some play in there somewhere as well, but yeah, Freddie's been a bit jet set working as of late, post lockdown measures. Has put the hours back in, haven't you, Freddie? So well done.
It's been nice to be here. Thanks for having me, Anna. It's been fantastic to be a part of the chat.
Well, absolutely, and your insights are amazing. And then to Stuart and Nathan, I can't thank you enough. I'll hand over to Freddie to do a proper thank you. But joining at 7 a.m. with glass of wine in hand to come and chat to our members, I'm so grateful for all your organisation and for letting us steal your morning just when you're preparing for harvest. So thank you. And I'll hand over to Freddie for the last goodbye.
No, thank you, Anna, and thanks for all your organisation. Yeah, guys, we really appreciate it. I know how much it means to everybody who's tuned in to be able to actually, hear these things direct from the horse's mouth, as they say. Your insight and knowledge is we're all incredibly grateful for it. So thank you, and in particular for getting up at the crack of dawn and opening a bottle of white wine to share with us all. So, guys. Been an absolute pleasure. I must admit, it doesn't quite beat getting out there and being with you in person. That was pretty fantastic. And just to reiterate to anyone watching, if you do get the chance to head out to Australia, and even if you're just in Sydney, then head to Brokenwood for the day, because it's well worth visiting. So, chaps, thanks so much. Raising a glass to you. This is looking absolutely delicious. Really happy with it. And I'll see you again very soon. And thanks to everyone for tuning in as well. Cheers.
Cheers, guys.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for having us. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.